Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to episode, I think it's 150-something of Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name is Larry Erickson. For the next nearly half hour, I'm going to be your ranter and raconteur, talking about things important to me and that I think are worthy of your attention. As always, any reactions to the show should be sent to me directly. The email address is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd like. If you do send me email, just two things. One, please be sure to include something like Left Side of the Aisle or your cable show or something like that in the subject line so I know it's not spam. And two, please be a little patient about getting an answer. I'm a little slow about dealing with email, but you will get an answer. All right, with that out of the way, we're going to get to it. I'm going to start, as I always like to, every week when I can, with some bits of good news. First one, I've spoken on more than one occasion about the strengthening movement among low-wage workers for a living wage. In fact, I mentioned it just last week. The thing is, even as that campaign slowly expands and strengthens, another front has been opened in the battle against the McDonaldization and the Walmartization of the American workforce. That front is a counterattack against wage theft. Now, wage theft is that illegal but all too common practice of employers cheating their workers out of wages or benefits that they have rightfully earned. Now, how big an issue is this? How important it is? Well, consider this. The amount of illegally withheld wages recovered by the Department of Justice in 2008. Now, this is not the total amount that people were cheated out of. This is the total amount recovered by the DOJ. The total amount of illegally withheld wages and benefits that were recovered that year was just about $185 million. And by comparison, in 2009, the very next year, the total losses from bank, gas station, and convenience store robberies combined was less than $57 million, less than one-third as much. Well, this week, workers in California, Michigan, and New York struck back. They filed a total of 6 lawsuits against McDonald's and its franchisees, claiming that they were systematically denied, or they were shorted rather, on pay by the corporation and, again, its franchisees. The complaints charge, among other things, that McDonald's and these certain franchisees violated minimum wage laws, violated overtime regulations, forced employees to work off the clock, and took illegal deductions for costs related to uniforms. Now, if this is certified, these are certified as a class action suit. This could potentially involve tens of thousands of present and past McDonald's employees, and in any event is going to serve to bring more attention to just how common wage theft is among low-income workers, especially in the fast food industry. In fact, just this past summer, there was a survey done of 500 fast food workers in New York City that found that 84% of them had experienced some form of wage theft in the preceding year. Now, of course, suits like this have to have named plaintiffs, and one of the 27 named plaintiffs in the suit said, and I'm quoting this, "I knew I wouldn't be making a lot of money, but I thought a well-known company like McDonald's would treat me fairly or at least follow the law." He really should have known better. So footnote to this, wage theft does not only affect low-wage workers. A form of wage theft was in the news in January when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals gave final approval to a class action suit against Apple, Google, Intel, and Adobe. The suit arose out of an earlier Department of Justice antitrust suit. And it charges that the corporations back in 2005 reached a secret agreement to not recruit each other's employees, to share their information on their wage scales, and to punish anybody that violated this agreement. This is actually illegally colluding to hold down the wages of their employees. And by the way, the people affected here, the point here is that these people were well-paid engineers but it holds down the wages of their employees by limiting their career possibilities. Now, the thing is that these employers, did they know that they were doing their employees dirt? Yeah, they knew. They knew. In the year the agreement was signed, which is again 2005, Eric Schmidt, he's the CEO of Google, he told his senior vice president for business operations to keep the agreement a secret and to only share the information verbally because, quoting, "I don't want to create a paper trail over which we could be sued later." Oops. All right, there's another bit of good news I have here. This one actually relates to food stamps. Now, you may know that the reactionaries in Congress combined with the spineless in Congress to cut food stamps. That is to take, basically to take food out of the mouths of poor people. The program now actually, by the way, is actually called SNAP. Stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, but I'm going to keep calling it food stamps because everybody else does. One of the ways this coalition of the reactionaries and the spineless cut food stamps was by changing the eligibility rules. See, one of the things some states do in establishing who is eligible for food stamps is that these people are qualified to receive heating assistance from a federal program called the Low Income Heating Assistance Program. Now, formerly, just getting $1 a year from the state in heating assistance was adequate. Now, obviously, no one actually got $1 a year in assistance. The point was that's how much the state had to kick in order for these people to be eligible for food stamps on that basis. It's actually a little more complicated than that, but essentially, that was the deal. Well, this new law said it had to be at least $20 a year per recipient. In essence, that means that the states who use this method, would have to kick into the program an extra $19 per recipient household in order for those folks to still qualify for food stamps. As a result of this change, about 850,000 poor families spread across 15 states and the District of Columbia stood to lose an average of $90 a month in food assistance. Thing is, the reactionaries figured that the states would not be willing to take on the added costs related to the fuel assistance in order to keep the food stamps going. For example, in Massachusetts, there are about 163,000 families that receive the heating assistance. At $19 a family, that comes up to some $3 million the state would have to kick in. Well, guess what? First Connecticut and New York, then Pennsylvania, Oregon, Montana, Rhode Island, and just this Tuesday, March 17th, Massachusetts, changed their standards in order to be in line with the new law. Basically, they incurred a few $1,000,000 in added contributions to the state portion of the low-income heating assistance program, but in return for that, keeping multiple millions of dollars in food stamp benefits coming into the people in their states, and thereby food into the mouths of the hungry. Again, in the case of Massachusetts, that $3 million additional expense will protect $142 million in benefits. That, frankly, is really, really good news, that these states have found this way to deal with this without hurting the poor people in their states. Now, it would make this news even better if the other 8 states that are affected by this change in the law, those states being California, Delaware, Maine, Michigan, New Jersey, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin, if those states were to take the same steps. Oh, and by the way, there's a side benefit to this good news. Getting to watch Speaker of the House John Boehner, Sir John of Orange, getting to watch him pop a gasket. He declaimed that these states, following the letter of the law in order to protect hungry people, is, quoting him, cheating and fraud. And he demanded that a stop to be put to it. Because, just like Paul Ranton told us, to have government help you to not be hungry does nothing but drain your soul. All right, 2 quick updates about things before we go to break. First, last week I talked about Ukraine. Now, this is still not a topic well suited, as I said at the time, to a weekly show. But there are a couple of things I wanted to mention quickly, almost ticking them off like bullet points. First, that vote in Crimea on secession from Ukraine and joining Russia, well, that was held as scheduled on March 16th, and oh my, what a shock, the people voted for it. Or so we're told. Just 2 days later, Russian President Vladimir Putin announces the annexation of Crimea. Now, the thing that struck me about this, though, is that according to the reports in that referendum, 97% of the voters wanted this. They wanted to secede from Ukraine and join the Russian Federation. The truth is now, nothing gets 90% of the vote in a legitimate referendum. Either that number's a lie, or they only counted the votes that they wanted to count, or, as is most likely, everybody else just stayed home because they knew the whole thing was a farce and they didn't want to add any credibility to it by actually increasing the turnout. Second thing, the Russian invasion and now annexation of Crimea is actually not universally approved in Russia. A protest in Moscow on March 15th against the Russian invasion of Crimea drew an estimated 50,000 people. Third thing, the first blood has now been shed in Crimea. A Ukrainian soldier was killed when gunmen attacked a besieged military base near the capital of Crimea on March 18th. And one other thing I want to say about this. I have been disturbed by the tendency of some on the left, like, my people, of some people on the left to too quickly and easily assume that the troubles, the strife in Ukraine are the result of some kind of machinations on the part of the United States or, though these days usually, and the European Union. It is too easy for some people to assume, to become so blinded by the historic and present wrongs of and committed by our own government, to become so blinded by the wrongs that we commit and still commit, to be unable to see that we are not the only actors in the world, that we are not the only powerful nation. We are a very powerful nation, but we're not the only one, and we're not that powerful, that all events in the world are caused by us. In fact, some events in the world happen that have absolutely nothing to do with us. The fact is, again, we are powerful, but we are not that powerful. I would urge people to remember the very wise words of Joan Baez, who some years ago said that, the U.S. is not the worst, it's just the biggest. All right, last update here. I've talked several times about the Keystone XL pipeline. Over the last month or so, I've gone after the State Department's final environmental impact statement on the project. First, for dodging the issue of the pipeline's impact on global warming. Then for its lies and deception about the jobs that would be, or actually more wouldn't be, created by the project. And then just 2 weeks ago, citing a scientific study about the actual impact on global warming of creating this pipeline. Well, now I have another update about that same report, because it turns out that the development of the report was riddled with conflicts of interest. We already knew that one contracting company which worked in the report had previously worked for TransCanada. This is the company that would build and own the pipeline. Now, that issue was dismissed by an inspector general who said all this is fine so long as the firm disclosed its ties to the industry and completed its work with TransCanada before working on the report. In other words, the finding was sort of like, as long as I tell you that I'm probably biased, that somehow means that I'm not biased, or something. By the way, the same Inspector General also said this was fine, even though the State Department redacted the information about the ties to TransCanada from its report, and in essence, hiding that contractor's ties to the industry. Well, now it develops that another firm contracted by the State Department to evaluate the pipeline, specifically in this case to look at greenhouse gas emissions, also has ties to TransCanada. Now, the company promised to mitigate any conflicts of interest involved, but the State Department has redacted that information from its report. So what those steps might be and whether or not they're actually adequate, nobody knows. The same company, by the way, has also consulted to the American Petroleum Institute and to the oil industry in general. And finally, just by the way, the 90-day comment for public comment on the report, there were over 1 million negative comments filed. And of the positive comments filed, a little research showed that about 60% of them could be tied to people in the fossil fuel industry. Let's take a break. And we're back. And that update about the Keystone XL pipeline actually leads us right into one of our regular weekly features. It's the Clown Award, given weekly for an act of meritorious stupidity. There's this thing called the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS. These standards are intended to establish uniform benchmarks for science education in schools across the country. They're developed with input from 26 states. Now, NGSS has been controversial in some of the expected places, like in Kentucky, where a Baptist minister complained that the standards present, and I'm quoting him, the rich man's elitist religion of evolution as fact, and claimed that the standards are a fascist method that teaches our children are the property of the state. Well, despite that, actually, it turns out Kentucky was one of 10 states that so far have actually adopted the standards. Well, the thing is, last year, a committee of Wyoming educators recommended that the state of Wyoming adopt the science standards, and the State Board of Education started holding hearings on the matter last November. As usual, the crazies were out denouncing presenting scientific facts as facts, because doing so was an atheistic attempt to impose a particular political view. But then the state of Wyoming went beyond that, went beyond what any other state has done. Just under 2 weeks ago, the legislature passed and the governor approved a budget that would bar the state not only from implementing, but from even reviewing the standards. It was literally a case of the state of Wyoming closing its eyes, putting its fingers in its ears and going, nah, 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 I can't hear you. Why? Well, there were some references to evolution, but the real reason for behaving like a bunch of stubborn, pouting 6-year-olds was that the standards present global warming as a fact, which it is. That was the only substantive objection raised, and doing that is something they just could not abide. After all, Governor Matt Mead of Wyoming has said that he's not sure there is such a thing as global warming, which is good because he obviously knows more about the fact than 97% of the world's climatologists. But on the other hand, that is just run-of-the-mill stupidity. This is what gets the award. State Representative Matt Teeters, who was one of the authors of the provision that barred the reviewing of the standards, told the paper, the Casper Star Tribune, that, quoting him, the standards handle global warming as settled science. There's all kinds of social implications involved in that I don't think would be good for Wyoming. What implications is he talking about? Wyoming is the largest exporter of energy among the U.S. states. Teeters said teaching global warming as fact would harm the state's economy. State Board of Education Ron Michelli agreed with Teeters, saying he doesn't accept that climate change is a fact either, and here's the money shot. The standards are very prejudiced against fossil fuel development. So you see, that's it. The Wyoming Board of Education, the Wyoming Legislature, the Wyoming Governor have joined forces to actively prevent school children from learning the scientific facts about something will have far greater impact on their future than the status of Wyoming as an energy exporter, because they say scientific truth is prejudiced against fossil fuel development. And one strongly suspects the campaign donations that come from that industry. The state of Wyoming, you are a clown. All right, from there we go to our other regular weekly feature. It's the outrage of the week. It starts 4 years ago with the debris from the 2008 financial meltdown still clogging our streets and our lives, with millions losing or facing losing their homes, foreclosures at record levels, in fact most of that due to outright criminality on the part of the major players in the mortgage industry who are heavily engaged in robo-signing, doctoring, or even forging documents. In that atmosphere, Barack Obama, the amazing Mr. O, promised to crack down on mortgage fraud. At a mortgage fraud summit in 2010, Attorney General Eric Holder said, I'm quoting, "In cities across the country, mortgage fraud crimes have reached crisis proportions, but we are fighting back." It was all BS and lies. According to a new report by the Justice Department's own Inspector General, the Obama administration has made mortgage fraud its lowest criminal priority and has closed hundreds of cases after little or no investigation. The White House claims that it's holding people responsible for the collapse of the financial and the housing markets, but the report shows that the FBI considered mortgage fraud to be its lowest ranked criminal priority. In fact, in several large cities, including New York and Los Angeles, agents either ranked mortgage fraud right towards the bottom, or they didn't even bother ranking it at all. And this was despite receiving significant additional funding from Congress to pursue exactly those sorts of cases. The claims the administration made in progress in this front have been grossly inflated, if not outright nonsense. For example, in 2012, Eric Holder said the prosecutors had charged 530 people over the previous year in cases related to mortgage fraud. It turns out it was actually 107. And most of those, as best as I can determine from a web search, were actually smaller players, not the big boys. Holder also claimed that those cases involved fraud that had cost homeowners over $1 billion in losses. It turns out that the actual figure was more like 95 million, less than 1/10 as much, which is what happens when you focus on the smaller players, not the big boys. And what's more, the Justice Department kept repeating these inflated figures for months after it knew that they were inflated. Now, why has the Department of Justice pursued such a hands-off approach to the too-big-to-fail crowd? Well, I mean, you already know the answer to that, but let me tell it to you this way. The blogger Digby noted the other day that everybody's having lots of fun looking over recently released transcripts of meetings of the Federal Reserve Board of Directors in 2008. One thing that became clear from those transcripts is that the Fed really just doesn't know or didn't know what was going on. At a meeting on March 18th, 2008, this is just days after the collapse of Bear Stearns, which is the first sign of the coming apocalypse. At that meeting, concerns that U.S. banks were undercapitalized were dismissed. In fact, Tim Geithner, who was then president of the New York Fed Bank and vice chairman of the Fed's Board of Governors, said that the real problem was people suggesting that there is a problem. All right, move forward from there just 7 or 8 months to find the world financial system in free fall as undercapitalized banks and other financial institutions fall like dominoes. Move forward a couple of months from that to January 2009. And who does the newly elected Barack Obama want as his Treasury Secretary? Who does he say is the one man that can save us all? Tim Geithner, the man who said that the only problem was saying that there was a problem. So why has the White House gone so easy on the big boys and the big banks? Why has Barack Obama been such a lamer on mortgage fraud? Why do the big boys walk free? Because he's on their side. And don't you forget it, because it is the outrage of the week. All right, I'm really short of time here, shorter than I intended to be, so something I was going to talk about I'm going to have to put aside. It will keep. To instead do one of our occasional features. We're going to wrap up with this. It's called Everything You Need to Know. This is where you can learn a lot about something really, really quickly. In this case, it's everything you need to know about what's wrong with the economy in just 2 sentences. 1. There are just over 1 million Americans who now work full-time, that is 35 hours a week, year-round, at no more than the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. 2, the entire earnings of all of those people combined in the year 2012 amounted to little more than half of the bonuses given to Wall Street workers that same year. And that is everything you need to know. All right. I'm just going to close with this. What I put aside, because it would take too long to explain, is you probably heard about this business about scientists being able to see to the beginning of time. It's been all the news, this great scientific breakthrough. You may not have been clear about what it meant, and so I was going to do an episode of what we call And Another Thing. It's where we do talk about cool science stuff. So I don't have time for that. I'll put that off till next week. But here's the thing, and why I raised that and tell you that. It has been proposed to me that left side of the aisle should do a quarterly, hour-long special of And Another Thing. A quarterly, hour-long special of cool science stuff. Now, I thought about this, and I'm willing to do this if I hear from a couple of people out there who say that they would like to see it. That's going to be my stand. I'm going to mention this the next couple of weeks, every show. If you would like to see a quarterly, hour-long special that would be just And Another Thing, let me know. If I hear from people, we'll do it. If I don't, I won't. It's that simple. So that's it for this week. We will see you again next week. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can, and peace.